Hi everyone. For those of you who don't know me, I am Laura Laker. I'm a journalist and I am the author of Media Reporting Guidelines for Road Collisions, which has been a bit of a longer project than I initially intended. So I started working with the Active Travel Academy, which is part of the University of Westminster, under the direction of Professor Rachel Aldridge, who many of you will probably know. Since 2019 in September, and I'm kind of doing a day a week with them roughly. I Someone came to me with this idea actually. I think it was back beginning of 2020, one of the last events I went to before lockdown. And so yeah, I've basically been working on it ever since, on and off. So the problem, which we probably all know, is that cars keep having accidents, and it kind of displaces in people's minds what the problem is with road collisions, and where the danger comes from and what the solutions are. So you get this language, car spins out of control, car deliberately mounts curb. Even on the left, this wonky one, that's from a report, I think it was last week, from the government. So cars exceeding the speed limit. It's just language that we all use, and journalists are just like everyone else, we kind of use this language without really thinking about it. Of course, the problem is that most crashes aren't car accidents. They are the result of human behaviour. We know that road crashes kill and injure a lot of people in the UK every year. Number hasn't really gone down in the last decade. Last year is obviously exceptional because people weren't really driving. But generally, the cause is things like speed, distracted driving, drug and drink driving, and then the fourth one that police talk about when they talk about fatal four is seatbelts. And we know that from an active travel perspective, obviously this is the Active Travel Academy, we know people want to walk and cycle more, but often don't feel safe to do so. And that, I've got a little box there. Part of the problem is, what I've just mentioned about how we kind of discuss these issues, and language is arguably part of the solution too. So there's some good research on this that's come out in the last couple of years. We know that subtle language changes have quite big impacts. That's why we have reporting guidelines for suicides and for domestic violence, and evidence shows, the research shows that crash is better than accident. Police say this as well. Police don't tend to say accident anymore. Road safety professionals don't tend to. There are pockets that still do, but generally that's where the trend is going, because there's a recognition that often these incidents aren't accidents. Research shows that saying driver rather than car is really powerful. If you have, often it's car and pedestrian in collision, or car hits pedestrian, and there's only one actual person named in that sentence, and that's the pedestrian. And so that's kind of where we focus subconsciously our blame, basically. That's where we focus our attention, and that's the only person mentioned, so that's the person we blame. Context is crucial, so knowing a bit more about the incident, not as an isolated occurrence, but as part of a pattern, because they often are. Its behaviours and its road design, and without that, it's just, well, accidents happen, people get hit, what can we do about it? But actually, there's quite a lot we can do. And obviously, we all know about this kind of implications of blame sometimes, and sort of coverage that complains about speed cameras targeting drivers, which is not very helpful. So yeah, the guidelines, draft guidelines, we launched autumn last year. We had a public consultation, and they were very long guidelines. So amazingly, we got 198 responses. 72% agreed with the principles of the guidelines. 21% indirectly expressed their support. 2.5%, that's 5, didn't agree. We had some really interesting responses. We had some professional responses from organisations. We had responses from people in the medical profession, individuals who are police, saying basically road collisions are such a massive issue. It's something we don't really recognise as a society, the scale of the problem, and language is part of the issue. And a lot of people who cycle actually saying that language used in the public domain makes them feel less safe on the roads. Yeah, there were some quite powerful responses there. So I realised that what I produced in the draft form was kind of going in the right direction, and the responses suggested that, but there was still quite a long way to go, and we hadn't really heard from many people in the media. So I did a lot of phone calls, called as many people as I could, and just spoke to them about what they felt about what we produced and what they felt needed to change in order for journalists to actually use them. So this was basically the process of balancing what the road safety community feel they would like, ideally, and what's practical from a journalistic point of view. Yeah, we were going to launch over the winter. I forget the exact date, but we ended up delaying to now because it was a much longer process than we originally realised, and we wanted to do a good job. So what we have come up with is 10 guidelines. First one, this is something that you see in professional standards. You know, journalism, it's kind of central tenet is accuracy. Like we said, avoid calling it an accident. Actually, I took these from Sarah Berry. She's kind of summarized my guidelines in a much more concise way. So I basically pinched, because it fits more easily on a slide. I kind of wish she'd been my editor as part of this. So talk about driver, not their car, because the reasons I said. Otherwise, you know, it leads people to believe that, you know, these things happen, nothing we can do about it when it's not the case. The next two, these are things that journalists told us, and people like Road Peace, the impact of what journalists publish on families of victims, really important things to consider, which aren't always thought about. Social media is really easy to publish stuff. And with road traffic reporting, to not kind of overshadow the injury that may have occurred with the fact that there's delays on the road. And I think because of what road kind of what these kind of road reports are there to do, that can kind of happen, and then you forget that actually someone could have been seriously injured or killed in that crash. And so that's important. As people who cycle will know, this is a bit of an issue sometimes with media reporting, generalizing behaviors, which can be quite unhelpful. So we put that in, just trying not to sort of point fingers at, you know, just say it in a polite way. Context. So yeah, context is really, really important. The research shows that context can have a really powerful effect. And it's not just hierarchy of road users stuff. It's about if there's been several collisions in an area in a certain period of time, to say that. Otherwise, the chances are that people will think, oh, well, you know, accidents happen, what can we do? And yeah, law breaking, there's the articles that you get about around speed cameras targeting motorists, they're targeting law breaking, and I think that's quite unhelpful when you see stuff like that. And research shows that reporting that reflects the kind of danger around these helps people to support enforcement, because that's often a reason that people don't want to do speed camera enforcement. They're afraid of what folks will say. And obviously talking to professionals, yeah, journalists are pressed for time, but very important to get that context and different perspectives than just emergency services. So that's the 10. These guidelines aren't, you know, they're not sort of legally binding. This is voluntary kind of standards by consensus. So it's something that's been produced in collaboration with a lot of different professionals, a lot of different organizations, and hopefully represent a standard that's kind of workable and helpful. And we've got support from some good organizations there on the right. And yeah, now it's just about kind of getting the message out there, and that's not just to journalists, that's to sort of emergency services where a lot of these reports come from. It's to government departments, yeah, and publishers. And you know, if we see some reporting that doesn't doesn't meet these kind of standards. I think it's really important not to give anyone a hard time, because journalists increasingly get so much stick just for doing their jobs, and some quite nasty stuff. And I very much want to stress that this is about, just helping people do their jobs. It's not about sort of yelling at anyone or, being mean to anyone, because it's quite, I was reading something yesterday, and Hold the Front Page had a couple of stories where journalists had been, they're sort of getting to the point where they're just dreading opening their emails. And I really don't want to kind of add to that. So yeah, and same with us, if there's stuff that we need to improve, very happy to hear it. Those are our contact details. That's the email. We've got a website, and I don't know if you know the Active Travel Academy, because they've basically funded this work. So that's a little bit about them. Rachel Aldred is kind of leading it. They do all sorts of stuff. I know Dave Fevier is on this call, and he was a massive help with these guidelines, helped me to draw them up, helped with the reference, or basically did the references. And it's been a huge help. And Luth from the Active Travel Academy too. So yeah, they do a bunch of good stuff. We do media awards every year. And yeah, now the guidelines, finally. Thanks, that's it.
Brilliant, thanks for that, Laura. Great to have a big day in active travel to get these things out, all official like. And we've got a couple of questions coming through, so we can have a little bit of a debate now. And then I'm going to bring in Helen Pidd from The Guardian, one of my favourite journalists, who's going to give her kind of perspective as well. First, Mark, did you have a question you wanted to ask?
Yeah, well, the biggest offender, the most noticeable and biggest offender on national and local outlets is the BBC, which seems to have a corporate line on accidents. And there was a thing today of Radio Sussex when somebody had a go at the local journalist, but it's not really, as you say, it's not them. It really seems to be a BBC wide, and they're such a monolithic organisation.
And even if it were the journalist,
but how do we change that? And somebody else put in the chat, the other thing is the traffic announcements. I was driving somewhere on Thursday, and you say there's been an accident, there's congestion, and they don't see themselves as news or reporters. They're the traffic announcers, and they're the ones that drivers listen to. So how can we, if we can get the BBC, then all the others sort of almost small fry.
Yeah, I've had a chat with a couple of BBC folks, and they seemed open to the idea. I think I was speaking to Andy Cox, who's everyone probably knows, the police lead for national. What's his job title? He used to be on Vision Zero in London. Now he's in Northamptonshire, but he does. Where is he? National Lead for Fatal Collision Investigation is one of his titles. And I mean, he feels that the BBC is getting slightly better. I don't know which bits he's been looking at, but I have spoken to him about this and mentioned it, and they said they would spread the word. So it's just going to be a sort of gradual process. I hope they do. They seem very open to the whole thing. I think the traffic reporting is a tricky one, because their job is really to tell people where there's delays, but I guess there's nothing to stop them from just mentioning why that there's been injury or someone's been killed, and not to make it all about people's delays, because I think it is really easy just to overshadow those. So I just think it's a gradual process. Yeah, and not to be just to be a bit patient with it, I think.
I was wondering about using somebody like Jeremy Vine or somebody high up to try and intercede, or would that not work?
I don't know. Could ask him. Give him an ask.
Yeah, why not? Okay, we've got a few more questions. And Roxanne, did you want to ask yours? Then we'll move up to the hands.
Sorry, Brian, you got me mid-snack.
Oh, sorry.
I've got some nuts.
I've got my Australian dinosaurs, but anyway.
Nice.
Was more to spark a discussion, but just be really intrigued to hear from people how they might be approaching this with their local media outlets. I'm just thinking, is it starting with a letter, asking them to make a statement to say they'll support it? I'm not sure. But also just a thought that came to mind is there some kind of place where media outlets can put their name to the guidelines and it's a sort of a public list? So if someone like Jeremy Vine endorsed this, is there a website where it says, these are the people who endorse these guidelines? It's Jeremy Vine, it's Cambridge local radio station XYZ, you know, just somewhere to sort of show people that there's buy-in for this. But anyway, any ideas for local engagement? Keen to hear them.
I've got a page at the end of the guidelines document. It's mainly kind of road safety organisations. It was basically just me emailing people. So I'm sure there's plenty more people who would support. Impress has put something on their website today about them. Yeah, they kind of list the other specific reporting guidelines. So yeah, I think sometimes just contacting your local paper and saying, you know, putting yourself forward as an expert, because yeah, help the journalists out of it.
Yeah, at least we've got best practice to point to now. So I think if we all keep pointing it out, hopefully things will change. Usually how things happen, isn't it? In a positive society. All good. Claire, Lady, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I'm just going to make 2 points. One, just in terms of the BBC, the BBC have, I'm sure Laura knows this, but just for everyone else, the BBC have their own editorial guidelines. All kind of media organisations have their own editorial guidelines, which acts as a style guide, but also, you know, in the BBC is quite, deals a lot with sort of impartiality and all that, and conflict of interest, all that sort of thing. So this is where you want this stuff, right? You want this written into the editorial guidelines and the BBC style guide. If that, it's very hard to get any kind of change. The BBC sort of seen as this like big monolithic thing. It's very kind of fragmented. It's more like a sort of, you know, system of lots and lots of little things. Like, you know, a traffic announcer in BBC Berkshire is not going to have any impact on what a broadcast journalist in Manchester would do on the website or whatever, unless you get the editorial guidelines changed, in which case they'll all abide by them. So that would be, I mean, I could link you up, Laura, with David Jordan, who's the head of editorial policy at the BBC, and that would be where that conversation would happen. And someone like Jeremy Vine, if they supported it, that would be useful. The second point I was going to say was, I mean, I kind of really support this, but, you know, in the dark ages, I trained as a journalist, and I'm sure Helen will talk about this, but can't help but thinking that a lot of this is to do with, like, this is a symptom of the fact that we don't have the law of presumed liability, which is what we really need, because journalists can't, they actually have to use things like in a collision, because you can't actually assume that it was the car's fault, even though 99.9% of the time it probably was. Under the law, you can't. So I just wondered if that had come up at all in your research, Laura, and whether, you know, this was something that, is anyone actively campaigning on that law at the moment? I just did a quick search. I know Chris Boardman said something about it a few months ago. So yeah, I think some of what you've put in there, Laura, is a symptom of the fact we don't have the right law. Thanks.
Yeah, and I think the highway code change that's coming up in a couple of weeks will probably have a hierarchy of road users, but I don't think that's super confirmed yet, and I think that will kind of strengthen. Yeah, I mean, because yeah, you obviously have to be careful. Yeah, not to blame anyone, and that's one of the factors, but. Yeah, maybe the highway code, but presumed liability. I mean, it's a bit outside of the scope. Yeah, I think, isn't Cycle Law Scotland? Isn't that one of their things? Anyway, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, just on the presumed liability thing. I mean, Chris was pushing it with British Cycling, the Turn in the Corner campaign, which was like a really with a view to getting this kind of thing, particularly like with giveaway and turn, and it was leading towards that debate. But yeah, it's never gone down particularly well, because it's like a complete change of our legal system, you know, reason and precedent and all that kind of business. But yeah, but still, so the side road zebras were pushed to Manchester was my kind of engineering fix for trying to make people take responsibility more. But yeah, if the good legal backing was there, that certainly would help. It's been fun. Graham?
Yeah, I wonder, Laura, if you thought about going a bit further and actually avoiding the use of words like cyclist and motorist and
yeah, we did. Yeah, we did, and I regret it. I regret putting it into the draft guidelines because it kind of certain parts of the media went for it a little bit, and I just think you have to be so. It's like I said, like there's obviously like things which might be from like a road safety or road safety campaigner perspective might be like nice, and I've written about, you know, should we stop using the word cyclist because it can become quite loaded. But I think from a journalist point of view, you know, call a spade a spade. It's about brevity, it's about clarity. Readers will understand a cyclist as a cyclist, and I just think if you start asking people not to do that, then you lose all credibility really as a yeah, if you're asking journalists to do stuff, you really have to like be on their level. So yeah, we did we did include it, and I regret it. But it's gone now. Probably not to return. I think there's kind of wider issues around just culture change around who we see cyclists as, and I think, I don't know, some of the changes, the improvements that we've seen over the last years to infrastructure. So I'm conscious the light next to me is quite bright, and I might just have be a silhouette. Yeah, we'll start to change those attitudes, but I don't think we can do it really. Yeah.
Yeah, you had the perfect blog post name to ask that question, Graham. That was a good from you. That's an in-joke. Ruth.
Hi, thanks. Well, one thing is normality or normalcy. I can't think of the proper word. Radio 3 last Monday morning, not yesterday, last Monday morning. I don't know if any of you listened to it, but Petra Trelawney cycles to work, and his whole program was about cycling and about Elgar was cycled, and there's an Elgar somewhere. One of you all know. I know it's on here somewhere. And he just kept talking about you showing something?
No, I'm just trying to make my face not really dark, and sometimes
you look lovely. You always look lovely.
It's just because I'm in like I feel like I'm a silhouette otherwise. Oh. Sorry, I didn't mean to distract.
Anyway, so he just talked about cycling half of the course, and one of the women cycles, and she talked about it when she took over the program, and a lot of the music they played were to do with cycling, and there was an opera that's about cycling. So I just think we actually need more normality about cycling as opposed to it being this rarity thing. And I'm sorry, but I disagree about cyclists, because a child is not a cyclist. Children cycle, and that's
I know, but yeah, if you're talking to a lay audience, I just think.
I know, but then they're the ones, you know, like someone now in Chiswick is saying, "I'm a pedestrian," and I think, but we all walk, unless we're wheeling, you know, with too many labels.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's interesting. I've got a friend of mine who's like a history teacher, and I said the word pedestrian to him, and he was like, "What do you mean by pedestrian?" He was so affronted that I was referring to people as a pedestrian, and it's just something that I say. I
thought you meant you were boring. Pedestrian, boring. Sorry.
Yeah, he probably did mean that, but yeah, there you go. Megan, did you want to have a question? You popped out, but it sounded a good one. Just try and do them in the order.
Wait, which one?
Yeah, you Megan.
I asked two.
Sorry, yeah.
So there was one that was kind of for the whole group, and I've seen a couple responses in the chat, although the chat just goes on and on, doesn't it? So now I've lost where those answers are. Sorry. Which was about people engaging with their with local journalists. So I've been having a situation in Southampton about a pedestrianized high street, which is all of a sudden got very, very controversial. And it was the one local democracy reporter who put out 5 articles back to back to back, probably because her editor said, "This is getting great engagement, like go for it." And I was saying, you know, geez, I'm trying to figure out what's the best way to deal with this. And our comms manager said, "Well, have you tried asking her for a coffee?" And I was like, I can do that? It had never occurred to me that I could actually just ask to meet a journalist and say, hey, would you be free to go for a coffee? And we did. And it just gave us, it now means that she knows me. She knows that she can come to me for quotes. She now knows that I don't work for the council, which is what she previously thought. And I could get a sense of what her priorities were. So my question was kind of, if you're coming from a campaign group, have you tried, rather than sending maybe just a press release, have you done any engagement with your local press, and has it worked? Have you seen a change in tone or a change in them being willing to pick stuff up? And is that something that on I was coming as sus trans, but if you're coming as a community group and advocacy group, has that worked for you?
Have you got any perspective on that, Laura? It's kind of one for the group a little bit. I will say that our next guest, the first thing I did when I started working up in Manchester was go and have a coffee with Helen Pidd and have a little bit of a discussion about how things were going to play out. So I absolutely advocate what you're talking about there, Megan. Laura, sorry, did you want to come back on that?
No, I think it's a great idea. It sounds like a really nice approach, and yeah, you get it's like anything. It's in life, it's about relationships, isn't it? And if they know you and trust you, and then that's a great way to start.
Excellent. Dave. Dave, one of these weeks.
Thanks, Brian. Sorry about that. I was going to point out.
Oh no, Dave, I'm going to have to mute you. Oh mate. Oh, sorry. It's worse than ever. It's almost like a look of the draw. Will he give us all a migraine? Look, I mean, love to hear from you, Dave. Maybe you're going to have to put it in the chat and I'll read it out for you. But yeah. Ooh, that was strong. Bryn.
Hi, yeah. Kind of question for Laura in terms of the process and the conversations that you had about. I must say, I'm delighted this has come out. I think it's one of the most important things to change the way we frame things. But one of the things that struck me is I just wonder if you think that there's actually a complicity in our language. I understand the thing that was said before about an urge not to blame people, not to jump to conclusions about whose fault it was. I understand that. I think we want to do that. But at the same time, I suspect that most people can't cope with the anxiety of knowing that a momentary lapse of consciousness of concentration on their part might cause terrible injury to another person. I honestly think most people, when they're made to think about that, would make them think. It does kind of challenge their confidence about whether they should be driving at all. And that's actually what's wrapped up in this language, that it's quite important for us to depersonalize it and to say it was the car, it wasn't somebody like me who did that. So for me, this is a really important step forward, although I can imagine why many people might feel it's quite a horrible thing and that somehow they're going to have to start taking the responsibility for things that they did by accident, that lack of concentration. And I don't know whether that was anything that you uncovered in that kind of conversation that you were having with people.
Well, I did an interview for a podcast that hasn't been published yet, but it was with a psychologist, basically she studies distracted driving among other things. And it's interesting because obviously driving is one of the most dangerous things that most of us will do in our lifetimes, but it's so normalized. And I think we treat it like, this wasn't her, this is just me sort of like miracle, but we kind of treat it like anything else when it's not really. There's much more at stake. But one of the things that she reminded me of was that something like 80% of drivers think that they're better than the average, which is impossible. But it's just that thing where you think that maybe the rules don't apply to you fully because you're better than the average, and that was quite an interesting thing that she said. And I think maybe talking about collisions in a more honest way will maybe start to shift people's. I mean, maybe that's optimistic thinking, but perhaps. But it's a whole kind of mindset change that we need, and we just don't recognize. And I think that the way that cars are designed, they're so comfortable, and you can do so much that it doesn't feel like there's danger really. It feels very, very comfortable, and there's all the technology there. And I was out with some friends in Surrey we probably all get this all the time, on Sunday, and just people overtaking on blind corners, and a couple of times almost hitting the oncoming traffic. And you just think how it's really luck that there aren't more collisions than there are already, but we just narrowly miss and then think, I don't know, for some reason maybe it doesn't register because it happens so frequently, but I don't know. I mean, I don't really know is the answer, but I think we do need to somehow get people ourselves to think about these things in a bit more realistic terms. But obviously road design has something to do with it, and messaging, and roads policing's been cut so people don't get caught for things, and the message isn't really getting out there. And yeah, there's a lot at play really.
Yeah, I'm sure Bob would have seen it as a perfect segue to the road danger reduction philosophy there. That's perfect, snap people out of the danger they're causing. We'll have one last quick question, then we'll go on to Helen, because I'm hoping to bring you back, Laura, for a bit of a debate at the end. Roxanne?
It wasn't a question. It was a follow-up to conversation about working with local journalists. So I thought I'd just share some experience from CamCycle. We actually have a weekly column in one newspaper and a monthly column in the other that we have in Cambridge. So what we found has helped really improve that relationship with local journalists is actually they're desperate for stories. And if you're a reliable source of good stories, they'll almost just print word for word what you give them. And then we've got to the point where we're negotiating exclusive advanced notice on certain stories. We made one of the papers a partner for our Festival of Cycling. So we had 6 to 8 weeks of weekly positive coverage about cycling. So make the story, feed it to the paper, negotiate we write it for free content regularly every week or every month in the paper. They love it. So, and then we're able to put in those positive stories. So definitely don't be afraid to pick up that phone and say, how can we help you get some great content? Or I'm happy to turn up and do this photo with all these bikes. We do this great big cargo bike parade in the city and it gets on the front cover of the paper. So you make the stories, just keep feeding them positive stories, and then they start to look very foolish if they then turn around and start saying bad things about cycling as well. But do be aware that you will train up a new young journalist and then they'll get promoted to London, and then you have to keep doing. I think I've trained up about 4 or 5 journalists now. But if anyone wants to see what we're up to, feel free to get in touch and I'm happy to share.
Yeah, and just to put a bit of perspective, and it's quite useful for council officers as well to speak to your campaign groups, because they can get stories out when you necessarily might not be able to. A tip I've used quite a lot in my career. Yeah. Is there any comment you want to do back on that, Laura? Or, sorry. All good.
I think it's great. I think it's amazing what you've done, Roxanne. It's brilliant, because there's so much. It's kind of easy, I think, to do kind of negative stories about stuff, but actually having positive, it's really nice.
Yeah, as long as that good old-fashioned journalist hook there. I've been on many long calls with journalists and they're just waiting for me to say that little thing that I can then hang it all off. Yeah, anyway, and you can have a guess, or maybe our next guest, there's another segue, will be able to enlighten us the big picture. Helen, are you there?
I am, yeah. My Zoom's a bit dodgy sometimes. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you fine. Yeah, the floor is yours.
All right, great. Well, thanks for letting me pop in. My name's Helen Pidd. I'm the Guardian's North of England editor, which sounds a bit fancier than it is because basically I am a reporter. I've written plenty of stories in my time about traffic accidents, and I thought it might be helpful just to set out the kind of realities that journalists are working under when they're writing these stories, because I think that some of you might think a bit more thought's gone into them than they actually have very often. I'd say most of those stories are written by, if it's a story about a kind of local traffic collision, it's usually written by a journalist who might be doing like 5 or 6 stories that day. And they tend to be based purely on the police press release, and often they're kind of copied and pasted, and that's about it. And there's no chance or opportunity for them to do any of their own digging into what happened. So I would say kind of bear that in mind. And also, even though a lot of the journalism now is on the internet, we still have quite strict word counts. So although I can see the argument for saying things like person on a bike, that's 4 words, cyclist is 1 word. And often there just isn't the space to go into the details. I thought that Claire made a good point about some of the legal constraints as well that journalists are working under. We're all taught at journalism school to be very careful if there is any prospect of somebody standing trial for something that's a crime. So that would include a traffic collision. And in those instances, yeah, we really have it drummed into us that we shouldn't be apportioning blame or be publishing anything which could imply that the driver, or I suppose the cyclist or whoever it was, is at fault. So that is kind of always in the background there. I think that the guidelines that Laura has drawn up are fantastic. I don't agree with all of them. I don't have a problem with driver, to be honest. I think until there are driverless cars, until that becomes a sort of thing that we actually see out on the streets, I think it's implicit that a car always has a driver. And I think it can get quite clumsy in the language when you just try to say that a driver knocked somebody over. So yeah, I'm not on board with that one. I don't have a problem with accident either. But I mean, I think that some of these points, I suppose what I'm trying to say, I think are still up for a debate a little bit. And if me at The Guardian is not quite agreeing with everything and we're basically on your side for everything, then maybe it's not a given that they will be adopted without question. The other point that Claire made was good, which I thought is worth mentioning, is that yeah, most media organisations have some kind of internal ombudsman. At The Guardian, it's called the reader's editor. It might be a managing editor, and they're the ones who manage style guides at the publications or radio stations, TV stations. And if the style guide changes, then everybody sticks to it. You know, you can see that this has actually worked over the years. For example, the Samaritans for a long time have been really pushing for how we report suicide. Not too long ago, there was horrendous details that used to be in the media about how people had killed themselves, and that has really stopped now as a result of the Samaritans. They were offering free seminars. Most of us have done a Samaritan seminar, for example, on how to report suicide, and they're really good, and that really makes a difference. Also, the way we report climate change is starting to change as well as a result of some lobbying. So we say global heating, for example, at The Guardian. Yeah, I mean, every time I have written a story that's referred to an accident or a driver, people give me loads of abuse for it on Twitter, and it doesn't work being abused. But if people send me a kind of really sensible email about it, then I'm always happy to have that kind of conversation, because there isn't a hard and fast rule. Sometimes I think it works saying driver. And somebody was asking in the chat about journalism schools. There are some key ones. I'm happy to provide you with a list of them if you want to get in touch with the course leaders at the journalism schools. But I think you've got to go to all of the different media outlets themselves and get them to change their style guides. I think that's how you will really influence the debate. And I'd be really interested to know from Laura if, for example, in Norway and Sweden, where they've really got their where the roads are much safer now, has there been a difference in the way that the media there report these incidents? I wondered. I thought that'd be really interesting to know. So yeah, that's my tuppence really. I don't know if that's helpful at all. But yeah, I think there's often, I mean, although I think in parts of the media there is particularly a campaign against cyclists, which is really unfortunate. I think a lot of this stuff, it's not because people have got a vendetta, it's because they're working really quickly and haven't necessarily thought about it. Anyway, that's all.
That was great, Helen. Great to hear the kind of practical side of it. And I'm hoping Laura wants to take her up on a few things that we can get to the bottom of it and have all this dirty laundry out in public. Wouldn't that be great? But Laura, have you got any feedback on some of the points that Helen made?
Yeah, so I know people have different opinions about accident. I know that the kind of legal term can include deliberate acts, but I don't know. I think the feeling is among among kind of most road safety professionals now, that it kind of implies something. It's individual choice, like you say, Helen. It's really kind of down to the person, and it's not a hard and set rules. But yeah, I mean, my feeling was that's kind of the way that things are going, and yeah, and so that's what we're advising. But and what was the other one? You mentioned Scandi countries, Vision Zero. What was that?
Oh yeah, there was the driver's thing, and
the driver, yeah. I don't know actually how the Scandi countries reporting has changed. It'd be interesting to know, but I don't actually know. Driver versus car. There was some research around this in terms of, they had 3 different stories. It had like 999 people, 3 different stories, and they put different kind of emphasis on the description of a collision between a driver and a pedestrian. And if they had car versus pedestrian, then the blame basically goes on. Although we kind of know that there's a driver in a car, not mentioning the driver means that we end up default blaming the one person who's mentioned in that sentence. And yeah, and I don't know why that happens, but it does seem to happen. And just saying driver versus pedestrian, or driver hits pedestrian, really changes that kind of dynamic in people's minds, and makes them think about the 2 people involved rather than just the one. But yeah, I mean, I realized that one was a really tricky one, and one that we agonized over, that clause, because it's difficult for a number of reasons. And obviously physically, if you're talking about the mechanics of a crash, it's not, unless the driver gets out, it's not the driver that's kind of hitting something, it's the vehicle that's colliding, but the vehicle doesn't act on its own independent of someone behind the wheel. So I don't know, that was the best that we could come up with. So.
That's really useful. I'll just give my perspective, because I remember when I used to use the word accident as well when I first started in transport. It was explained to me like that it could just be like a freak occurrence, and just like, oh, what can you do about it? Whereas like a collision, it could be something systemically wrong with the design and the characteristics of the road. So it had a bit more of a designer's responsibility, and made us think a bit more rather than go, just an accident, it happens, to actually this is a collision. It could be a routine thing as a result of the way the highway is designed. So it puts a little bit more like a pressure back on to do stuff on the engineers like myself to do things. But I have to say, while we're on the subject, I always like the American term crash. I just kind of think that's the plain English version that works for me. But like I've muddied the water even further now, so I'll move on. And did you want to come back on Laura's stuff at all, or you happy to take it on the chin? That it's all good.
All good.
Very good. That's the kind of debate we want. Debate with civilized people. If you do. Okay, I'll bring in Mark. Mark, have a question?
Well, it's more of a point about language. Before I did all this stuff, I was a psycholinguistic researcher, and I wanted to raise something called the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. If any of you have read 1984, read the end of 1984, the appendix, it talks about newspeak and about how if a term isn't existing in a language, people can't necessarily think about it. It's famously Inuits have 30 words of snow, and therefore they can tell the difference in 30 different types of snow, which is the strong hypothesis. The weak one is that they can just describe them more seriously, more easily. And I think that's what we're looking at, is if you go and read up about Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, if you start describing things, people's thought about the thing that you're describing changes over time, and it becomes harder. So if we start talking about accident, we do imply that it's an act of God, it's no one's at fault, and it's just something that happens, and a crash or something that's systemic and applies agency to one or other party starts changing their minds. And I think that there is a broad psychological implication of the term accident, which somebody talks about violence against women and how we shape the argument by the way we change the language. And I think that it's a very similar way of shaping things, people's thinking. So just want to think about that in the broad psychological framework of populations as opposed to individual stories. And that goes for all of us, how we use language, by the way, not just journalists, of course.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really great point and really articulately made, Mark. I think we could all listen to that one. But yeah, I remember John Parkin used to really hammer home to me about language. He's really pernickety about things, and it does a whole section in one of his books, which I've got behind me, on the importance of language in transport, because there's all these words that I'm going to the engineering side, but we like to use words to distance ourselves a little bit, like the way the police officers do, because you don't want to wake up and go, actually, yeah, I've caused 6 fatalities today with my awful designs. You want to go, you start talking about pedestrians and collision rates, and you start distancing itself, and it can be that little bit of like a protection mechanism. So you pull that wall around, and suddenly you get the horror of what you're doing. Like, I make one mistake at work and someone's going to die. And it's a little bit the other way around. So we have to be aware of the sensitivity of it. But anyway, a little bit of commentary there. I'll pass over to Ian in Nottingham.
Yep. Hi. Thanks to you both for the talks. Really interesting. I wanted to ask about something that I see a lot in local news reporting, particularly. I think it's local news reporting, particularly of crashes, is this kind of really sensationalist language. The one that I see often is horror smash, quite often. I'm wondering if the guidelines have anything to say about that, first of all, but also if you more generally have any thoughts about using that kind of really sensationalist language to talk about, well, incidents that happen on the road, and whether you think that affects the discussions or how we think about them at all.
That's a good one. We got to hear from both of you on this one. Laura, what did you say about that?
Oh, horror smash. Yeah, I know. It's yeah, you do see that a lot, actually. I mean, I guess part of the purpose of these headlines is to get people to read the article, and if it grabs their attention, then it's doing its job. I don't know, it's a tricky one. I don't like it either, but I haven't said anything specific in it. I mean, like I was saying before, I mean, you can't be prescriptive like that. I'm not telling people how to do their jobs down to controlling what they say, but I mean, controlling everything they say. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I don't want to go telling people not to use horror smash. Yeah, it seems quite popular.
My objection to it is just that it's like a horrible cliche. And it's one of those things I think I'm not sure if it's necessarily unhelpful, but it's just a bit tacky, isn't it? And I think there's just some phrases that we shouldn't use because nobody uses them in normal language. I don't like the word incident. I know that's something that the guidelines suggest we should use, but that's like, it's a word that normal people would never use. There was an incident. It's sort of too clinical, policey. Yeah, I think just sort of sticking to things that people actually say is a bit more helpful. Horror smash.
Yeah, and having a little bit of sensitivity to the fact that someone's life's probably been taken in there, and their relatives are reading that thing. So I'm not a big fan of that. Albeit, while you were saying, I've got all the squares of everybody up on the river, and Ranty's evil cycle lobby thing was next to you as you were saying that. So an interesting juxtaposition. All right, Shane, I'll bring you in.
Hi, Brian. Thanks. I just want to pick up on something Helen said, because I think it's important, is that this language is often coming from the police, that, that the person writing up the piece is just taking a press release from the police and just rehashing it a little bit, or maybe not even rehashing it. And is there an argument for trying to get the police to change how they describe these things when they're putting out press releases? And I know some police forces are, I'll be polite, a waste of time when it comes to road safety, but others are, like, you see Andy Cox is a good example. Like, is it maybe a better use of people's energy to try and get the police to change how they describe crashes?
Yeah, I don't think it's an either or. I mean, the police are on our radar, and I'm hopefully doing a presentation to them in the near future about this, because some of them kind of do it and some of them don't do it, and it's very variable. But that's definitely on our radar, and I meant to mention that in my talk. I'm not sure I did, but that's where the stories come from a lot of the time. So.
Yeah, I mean, I said it in the chat. I think it's a really good idea to contact your local police force, and as ever, the sort of best way of making them change their mind and your local media outlets is if you can find somebody who has been the victim of a horrible I was going to say accident. No, if there's something in the guidelines that actually kind of stuck with me, somebody who had actually been run over, about how it made her feel, the way it was reported. And I think that that's how you'll hammer the message home to people, if you can find somebody who's actually been involved in some local collision, who can change people's minds. I mean, have you contacted, Laura, have you been in touch with the national, what are they called these days? They used to be called ACPO, the National Police Chiefs Council. They tend to disseminate the guidelines to everybody else, don't they?
Yeah, there's a kind of academic, there's like there's an equivalent for road policing. I'm in touch with someone who's doing who's like coordinates road policing stuff. Forget their title. They've got really long titles, but I'm hoping to get stuff out to them because
Yeah, some really good point. I mean, we've got to remember that the police are normal. We had Mark on for like 3 weeks, definitely taught me around some of the great work that police officers do, but they're going to use language that everybody uses as well. And there's still a lot like journalist responsibility not to just activate a prejudice to get a click. That's really what we're talking about here. That's my really awful way of explaining what Mark did eloquently, but still got to watch that kind of language. And I think this is a good step in that direction, because we all wince every day, but then we're wincing and then we're reading it just to see how bad it is. So they're kind of winning, and then the people that have activated their prejudice go, evil cyclists runs over foot of pedestrian. They go, oh yeah, well, let's just see how bad they are and win. So that's double click. So that's the whole issue of journalism now, which we need another couple of hours to get into the philosophy of. But we're kind of, anybody got any more questions for them, or should we start kind of rounding up? I might ask the two. Oh, Steve, come on, Steve from the north.
You can't ignore my hand, Brian, otherwise I might mute you.
Sorry, mate.
No, I just wondered one last one really, which is pulling back from language use to the fact that since we started this little online weekly happening, there's been a lot of coverage, obviously, with low traffic neighborhoods and loads of switches during COVID. So I just wondered, taking a broader perspective, what Helen and Laura think the story's been like over the last 12 months and what the main themes are and what the kind of coverage has been like.
Wants to go first? That was such a better question than I've been asking. Go on, Laura. I'll let you go first.
Well, I think we've all seen it, haven't we? It wasn't really an issue a year ago. Low traffic neighborhoods, no one was really talking about them. But then, they've become a big thing. I don't know. It's getting towards the end of the day, and I'm feeling a bit peckish. I'm starting to get really spaced out. So I don't know. I think we've all seen how the debate's gone. Maybe Helen has a more coherent way of describing things.
Well, you've certainly written lots of coherent articles, so we'll forgive you getting tired at the end of the day.
I get quite hungry, and then I can't talk to anyone. This is where we're at now, I'm afraid. Sorry.
It's all good. Helen,
I think there was a sort of a cycle that we went through, and maybe a lot of people on the call felt really quite optimistic in April, May last year, seeing more people out on their bikes, and the stories of amazing sales at bike shops and all of the emergency travel measures that were coming through. And then there was, of course, the backlash. And then, low traffic neighborhoods, it's just become an absolute obsession. But they're not straightforward, though, are they, low traffic neighborhoods, actually? And, when you started to get people campaigning against them, like the mother of Ellie Kissy Deborah, the 9-year-old girl who it was proven, wasn't it, at a second inquest, that she had died as a result of air pollution that gave her a respiratory condition. I don't know, it gave me pause for thought, actually. I hadn't really thought about the other side, because I was just like, low traffic neighborhoods, it sounds amazing, or active neighborhoods, whatever we want to call them. So it's a tricky one, and I suppose those have been the main topics. But what I think has sort of been slightly underplayed is that all of the initiatives that are being proposed, including low traffic neighborhoods, are all coming right from the top at government. It's coming from Boris Johnson, and it's coming from, what's his name, who used to work at the BBC, what's he called, Andrew Gilligan. and that the Labour Party basically agrees on all of them. So they're at the top of the political parties, there's the will to do it. Where it's kind of meeting the opposition is at local councils who are not taking on what their national leaders are doing. So I think that's yeah, something that could be interrogated a little bit more. I don't know, what do you think, Steve?
I agree. I mean, it's been a fascinating sort of, I think probably 2 or 3 waves of heat, warmth and heat in the storyline over, you know, between that initial bike sales through the roof moment through to sort of, you know, the bike clash that definitely happened even before low traffic neighborhoods. It was already starting, really. So I think it has been a really, really interesting sort of moment in time. And I think on this call that we have every week, we've been rehearsing sort of the main stories and getting updates on what's happening locally. And you're dead right. It's been hitting serious opposition at that local level, even though there's been a huge amount of support from the top, which yet again goes to show, and there's people on this call who are really experienced in this, the only way you meet success is from the bottom up and the top down at the same time, really. That's the key to success.
Yeah, I remember about a year and a half ago, Helen, I was doing a talk with you and some people on a low traffic neighborhood, and I was slightly over-egging it, but like saying the drama that was going to come and how you had to all get together as a group. And I remember you looking absolutely horrified going, what is he talking about? Surely everybody wants this. But I was really like, I'm going, no, when the flat comes, get bunkered, make sure you stay together, stay on message. And people going, whoa down there, Brian. But yeah, I think we've all had a little bit of a taste of that in the
I think, Brian, just
so
one last thing from me, Brian, would be, I think there's an even bigger picture, really, which is the story of a net zero transition for the whole world. Because we interrogate this from the perspective of transport and active travel. But if you look at every other area of our lives, they're going to have to change really dramatically in our lifetimes. There's going to be an incredible transition. So whether it comes to deep retrofit of your home, taking fewer flights, becoming, getting on the spectrum towards being a vegan, weirdo vegan like me, there's going to be a massive transition. And this is going to be really fascinating to watch, because we've been watching it and talking about it for a year from our world, but it will happen in all the other domains of human life.
Well, that's a good point. Claire, did you want to come in?
I wasn't on mute, sorry. Yeah, I was just going to say that the way you phrased that, Steve, was, you know, that is going to happen. And I still don't know whether it is or not. And either it will, in which case massive change, we'll have to get used to it, or it won't. And then we'll continue to get the rhetoric without the action. And I mean, I'm not really interested in this because I really hope it doesn't happen, because that would be disastrous for the whole future of human race and the earth. But if that continues, which is all the rhetoric and little action or not enough action, that which does look like the most likely path, then what will happen? You know, will there be revolution? Will there be, you know, there's a pathway there that isn't what you've described, but is the path that we're currently on. And so, yeah.
Yeah, we're all getting big now. Simon, did you want to come in with a point? Yep.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, the thing, listening to Laura and Helen and then Steve and what everyone's saying, I mean, we are talking about a culture war ultimately, or a big cultural shift in how we think. And to my mind, the thing that sits at the back of all of this is, if I take one flight less a year, that's not much change in my life. Or if I, you know, like, I don't fly a lot. Most of us don't most of the time. Most of us don't spend all our times these days eating nothing but meat, steak all the time. So a lot of the changes, electric boilers and whatever, aren't going to be massively noticeable. But the shift out of the car for a whole bunch of people is a massively emotional, kind of life-consuming thing. And we have built our cities and our towns and our lives and where we work around the car. So that is the one thing that is going to be hard. emotionally hard, very clearly is for a lot of people. And that's why police say things about collisions in certain ways. And that's why journalists have that whole massive embedded load of assumptions in what they do. You know, I used to be a journalist, so when I point the finger at journalists, I'm pointing as much as myself. But that's also, you know, why LTNs are so controversial, because we're asking people to change their behavior. And it's around one of the things that is the most central thing. It's the equivalent would be if we said, right, none of us can live in houses now, we all have to live in teepees. That would be the, you know, if you can imagine the outrage if we said that, that would be it. That's the car, you know. So I think it's that, and I think we just have to face it. I mean, I think the LTN thing, very briefly, is, you know, the government and Gilligan wanted a blitzkrieg. That's the whole approach of Andrew Gilligan, and the whole way that he did London was like, right, just go at it hard, go at it fast. That has been difficult for a whole bunch of councils, but the slower version from a climate point of view also wasn't working brilliantly for us. Let's do one filter every 5 years for the next 25 years. That'll be brilliant, you know. No. So I think there is a load of questions about culture and pace here, and shock, and how much of a shock it is. But fundamentally, getting people to shift their cars is tough.
Yeah, it's a really nice summary. We probably grilled our journalists enough, albeit it's been quite nice to be at the other end of there. But like, if you wanted to come back in with any final comments, you're more than welcome to. Or if you need to get some meeting done, Laura, that's fine as well.
Could I just say something to Laura and Helen very quickly?
I was saying, go on. I was going to come to you next, Ruth, but yeah, sure, go on.
Well, what it was is that we had Andy Cox came and spoke to Hounslow Cycling, and he gave us this statistic which sticks in my brain. The year before last, there were 12,000 speeding tickets in the whole year in the Metropolitan of London. Last year, there were 23,000 by September, 23,000 speeding, including, for example, 163 miles an hour in an 80, 84 miles in a 20, 134 in a 40. What the difficulty we have, I think, about driving is that you can quote those figures, which are shocking to the car lobby, the anti-LTN people. It doesn't hit a nerve, unlike me on my bike, possibly going through a red light. So for me, it's that there's a real disconnect between the danger that can be caused by driving, bad driving, dangerous driving, and those of us on two wheels. And I think that is really hard. That's what I want to say.
Yeah, I think Laura, mentioned that point as well about the disconnect and the Honda as well. So yeah, good point to make. Claire, did you want to come back in? See your hand up there.
I think I just forgot to take it down. Sorry.
A historical hand, that's all good. So yeah, I'll offer Laura, Helen, did you want to have any last words, or shall we wind it up?
I think that's it for me. I found some raisins. So
there we go.
But yeah, this kind of stuff happens everywhere, though. The kind of backlash, if you will. People don't like change, and I think Mark Hodson of West Midlands Police once said that, because he's worked with various psychologists, and he said one of the reasons that people get angry about cycling is that they're worried that they're going to be forced to do it themselves. And I think, I don't know, I think there's a fear, and it does look like a technical thing. If you look at people in Lycra on like fancy bikes with skinny wheels, it could look a bit scary to people. And I think there is it's a bit of a change for people to come around to. So yeah, it's just bound to happen. Change is difficult. So
yeah, I always like to call it the easy rider. Oh, so go on, Helen.
Well, I suppose all I just wanted to emphasise is that, journalists, we're mostly not terrible people. We're fallible human beings working to deadlines, and we're also very, very susceptible to flattery. So if you want us to change the way that we work, write us an email, say, oh, I really enjoyed that piece you wrote about XYZ. Can I go for a coffee? And then I feel like, we can definitely be influenced in that way. So if you haven't already got to know, just look in your local newspaper, listen to the radio, which are the journalists who are most often reporting on these issues, flatter them, buy them a cup of tea, and hopefully you'll change their mind.
Can't beat that. Let's move over to Ruth for final words.
Yes, on Sunday in Chiswick, there's a farmers market, Duke's Meadows Market, which is quite difficult to access without a car. There was a lovely chap with a Babbo bike, and he had 2 toddlers aged 2 and 4. So I always talk to people who've got children in bikes because I love them so much. So I said, oh, that's fantastic. Do you use it all the time? He said, yeah, we use it all the time. And then he pointed to the front where the 2 little boys' feet were. And he said, normally I've got my 4-month-old in there in like a car seaty thing. So I said, that's incredible. And he said, yes. He said, I do the school run with my children in this Babbo bike. But he was German. So maybe the more Europeans we have in this country, it will become. But we've got a lot of Babbo bikes in Chiswick, and they're amazing.